All right, let's look at a few points for the case study assignment. We haven't looked at it really since the summer, so if you're doing it now, it's been a while since we went over it. Please make sure that you look at this updated description of the project. I've made a few changes since the version that you got this summer, simply because there were aspects that really just don't make sense based on your student teaching context now. The first thing to notice is that you're going to work with an English learner for at least 10 hours, and this is going to take a different form based on your situation. For some of you, and my hope is that you're going to have a student in a course you're already student teaching, and that you can just devote a little bit of extra attention, maybe even only in your own mind, to this student. That'll be more convenient. It's going to give you more natural opportunities to work with them. You're just going to get to know them really well because you're going to be spending so much time with all the students in the classes that you're teaching. Now, that may not be the case though. Depending on how many English learners are in your classes, inevitably some of you will have no English learners in any of the courses you're student teaching. And in that case, you're going to need to look for another alternative. You might work with another student in a neighboring class, maybe through another teacher in your department does have an English learner in their class, and you could maybe observe their class a few times during your prep period. Perhaps you want to talk with an ESL teacher in the school, which would be a great idea anyways. And you could go observe one of their classes during a plan period. Maybe they can even connect you with a student that could really use some extra tutoring, and you could meet with that student during their lunchtime or before or after school, depending on what the schedule is like where you're working. So if you're working with a student that's already in a course you teach, for sure you will put in at least 10 hours with that student. And if so, then you don't need to worry really about keeping an activity log. However, if you do end up working with a student outside of a course that you're already teaching, then do note those times and basically what you're doing with that student, whether it be tutoring them individually or just observing a class that they're in. One other thing I want to mention in this section, well actually two. One is that make sure that you think about this project as a very casual thing. You want to have informal conversations that come up naturally with the student just as they would with any other student in your class. You're not going out of your way to interview them or push them to talk about anything that might be uncomfortable to them. The idea is simply that you want to get to know all the students in your class. You're going to end up having small conversations with lots of students during passing time, when they're working on a group activity in your class. And over time, you're going to get to know your students better. Other thing I should mention is with WIDA scores. It is not required that you get those WIDA scores to do this assignment. If you're able to get them, that's great. It will help you. If you can't get them, it's no big deal. No matter what you do, whether or not you get those scores officially or not, I want all of you to make observations about your students' oral and written use of English and see where you think they would fall within the WIDA descriptors. And this is going to come up in section 2 of the paper. You're going to go through and talk about observations you've made of your students' writing, reading, speaking, and listening, whatever you have. You may not have for all 4 modalities, but you're going to try to put together what you can find. Even keep little clips of their work, and you can incorporate that into the paper, maybe a small paragraph of writing that came out of something they were doing in your class. And then you can look at that and analyze and talk about how you feel that shows what their WIDA score, or level might be. The activity log I mentioned a minute ago. The idea here is that if you're already observing a student in a course you're already student teaching, then all I want you to do is note the beginning and end dates of your placement and have your cooperating teacher signed. you're going to be seeing them so much that it just won't make sense to write down every detailed thing you're doing, because that would be writing down everything you're doing for that course. On the other hand, if you're observing a student outside of the courses you're teaching, say you're tutoring an individual or you're observing an ESL course, do keep an activity log in that case. If for no other reason really than to help yourself, keep track and get yourself up to 10 hours, which is really the minimum that you need in order to start making the kinds of observations about this student that will help you to really connect theory and practice in a useful way. As far as the due date, I've selected April 17th. 11:55 is just because that's when Moodle cuts it off. April 17th comes time-wise between your second and third spring assignments, and so it seemed like that would fit nicely with the flow of what you're going to be turning in anyways. However, if this doesn't fit well with your schedule, as far as assignments you're having come due or when your student teaching is beginning and ending, please just let me know and we'll shift it around. Okay, a few other things I want to show you briefly. Here's the activity log. Again, if you are already working with a student in your course, just note the beginning and end dates of your student teaching placement. If you're meeting with an individual outside of that context, then do keep a more detailed list of the activities. And then make sure in either case to get it signed by your cooperating teacher. Next section talks about, it gives you some guiding questions. Just remember that you're not going to answer every single one of these questions. They're meant to be guides. For example, this question, what is the story of the family's uprooting and resettlement? I bet many of you won't find that out. It just won't come up. And that's not the kind of thing you want to necessarily press a student to talk about. If it comes up, talk about it. If it doesn't, no big deal. Just focus on the areas that you do find out about. Some of you may decide to focus on more than one learner. You may be able to, you may not get as much information as you would want on one individual, but maybe you have 2 or 3 students in your class, and between the 3 of them, you're starting to, to make some really interesting connections about what it means to have an English learner in your classroom. So feel free to do one of 2 things. Either you can, throughout your paper, talk about 3 different individuals using pseudonyms and bring them up when it seems relevant, or you could even combine their 3 experiences into one sort of fictional character almost, because the whole point of this is for you to talk about the learning that you're doing about what it means to be an English learner. And so if that's a useful way and an easier way for you to write about it, then feel free to sort of synthesize your observations into one individual. And don't forget, no matter what you do, always use a pseudonym. Just make up a name. Okay, so we have some questions below. Again, make sure that you, for the WIDA levels in section 2, make sure that you don't, especially if you don't get access to the actual scores, make sure that you talk about what you are observing and what you feel like their levels might be. And the more samples you can include of something you saw them write, something you heard them say, just the easier it becomes for you to show that you have evidence for what you're thinking about. Also, you're going to talk about types of supports for learning that were demonstrated, and these might end up being things that you're doing or trying to do, depending on where you're at in your student teaching. And it's okay to talk about, things you've tried that don't work. Don't feel like you need to demonstrate that you are doing perfect practice. None of us are. And so it's great to actually talk about the kinds of things you're trying and what's working, what's not working, what questions you have. Finally, the third section, you're going to make a reflection just to talk about personally, sort of what's going on in your mind as you're constructing, I don't really know the best way to say this, but as you're building your sense of who you are as a teacher and your practice as a teacher. What thoughts are you having related to working with culturally and linguistically diverse students? And also the really important part to bring into this section is the coursework from the summer. So revisit our Module 1 and 2 materials. They're all still on the Moodle. And here you want to make specific connections to specific things from the coursework and include citations so that I know, what reading you pulled from or which video. That way, it makes more clear for me the thinking, the good thinking that you're doing in your head. I think that is all. Again, oh, and then the rubric is below. So make sure you take a good look at that. I would say the main thing that people often lose a lot of points on are this last section right here, which is what we just talked about, including concrete citations to the things you talk about in your paper. Okay, well, once again then, the due date for this project is April 17th, though be in touch if this conflicts with any other big projects going on in your classes or at school. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.